Good afternoon, everybody. This is the NACC Session. Welcome. I'm Bud Kukel. I'm the director of NACC, and I just like being in the spotlight here, but because it's blinding. But anyway, let's start off the session. We've got really a lot of things to cover. So much activity going on at NACC these days. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Biber, who's the program director at NACC, and she's going to be kind of running this overall presentation and so on, and she'll give you a good flavor for what a lot of the different things that we're doing are. So, Sarah.
Okay. Thanks, Bud. It's good to be here. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the NACC session. As Bud mentioned, we have a lot to cover today, and we're excited to update you about the work that we are doing to advance ADRD research and amplify the impact of the ADRC program. I will be kicking off the session today with an overview of how NACC is delivering on its expanded mission through modernization. And I should probably advance the slides. You're going to hear from a number of folks from NACC today. So before I get started with my talk, I wanted to mention that everything that myself and others at NACC are going to share today was made possible by the incredible team at NACC. I want to thank the NACC team for teaming up to accomplish this important work together. Can all of the NACC team members that are here in the audience please stand up and raise your hand so that people know who you are. I encourage attendees to connect with them and learn about the great work that they are doing. I also want to give a special shout out to my team members who are instrumental in organizing this conference that we're all at this week. These conferences are a huge lift, and it wouldn't be possible without the great team that we have. I want to thank Hannah Rosenstrader for helping to lead this effort. I also want to give a special shout out to Claire Cassidy, Teresa Barnhart, Amy Young, Brittany Hale, Val Hawkins, and Eileen Ida. Thank you all so much for your help in pulling together this wonderful conference. Yeah. Okay. So NACC's role, as many of you know, has and continues to expand. So NACC is now serving as the data coordination, collaboration, and communication hub for the ADRC program. So NACC's goal has always been to make our data as findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable as possible. We have a great track record of doing that. Today, I will be focusing my talk primarily on how we are modernizing our infrastructure to support this mission further and amplify our impact. But first, I want to say just a few things about the communication and collaboration arm of our work. So NACC is now providing coordination and project management support for a growing number and a variety of ADRC groups and committees. I've had the opportunity, and others on the team have opportunity to work with an increasing number of you over this past year, which has been wonderful. And we do a variety of different work in support of those groups in terms of coordination, project management support, and other ways as well. We also develop collaborative, apologies, I forgot to switch the slide. We also develop collaborative surveys with many of those groups. So just since last January, we've actually collaborated on 24 surveys for ADRC-wide initiatives. And we are pretty good at doing surveys, I have to say. We have a 90% response rate for the collaborative surveys that we distribute, which is great. Laura McLeod will be telling you more about our NACC directory, which we are building to make it easier for all of you, as well as for other researchers outside the ADRC program, to connect with ADRC researchers to do important work. In addition, we're going to be expanding the communication arm of our work, and really our goal is to do more to highlight the unique value of the ADRC program and NACC to legislators, researchers, and the general public. So you'll be seeing a monthly newsletter from us coming online soon. We'll be developing an annual report. In addition, we're working to change our website into a dynamic communication platform. But as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing primarily today on the modernization. So as Bud discussed earlier, as you all know, NACC is in the process of transitioning to UDS v4. As Bud mentioned during the director session, we are making great progress on updating the UDS content in collaboration with the CTF, led by Alan Levy. So these content updates are critical for advancing the field and ensure that the UDS study reflects new research and technology developments and our evolving understanding of best clinical practices. Really important work. In addition, you can learn more about this at the CTF session, which will be happening later this afternoon. So this year, it's more than just a content update, as I've discussed before. So this transition is a massive undertaking, and it's going to be even more massive this year because it's going to be accompanied by transformational modernization at NACC. And I'm going to tell you more about that today. You're also going to hear that from other NACC speakers during this session. So this modernization is actively underway in collaboration with others in the community, and it's aimed at aligning NACC with NIH's data science strategy, better serving the ADRC program and the ADRD community. We want to make it easier for sites to submit and access their data. We want to integrate more data streams and make data easy to use for impactful research. So those are just some of our reasons why we want to do all the modernization that I'm telling you about today. And we want to do all this in collaboration with you and other key stakeholders. So this modernization will be a primary focus of what I'm going to be talking to you about today, as well as what you were hearing about from other team members. So I'm going to give an overview of how we will collect data from the ADRCs, how we will integrate new data streams into our repository, and how we will share this data with researchers. So I'll start with how we will collect data from the ADRCs. So we are in the process, NACC is building a modern data submission interface that is based in REDCap. So the existing submission interface at NACC was 20 years old and in need of an update. We are starting with REDCap because that is the canonical tool for forms data capture, and this was also what the majority of the ADRC sites were either already using or wanted to be using. So we want to make it easier for sites to submit data. So this is going to involve using this modern system. In addition to enabling electronic data capture, NACC will continue to host regular batch submission for the sites for UDS4. But in the future, all UDS data will go through REDCap at NACC through one of these three mechanisms that I've outlined here. And one of the things that is really exciting about this is that we'll make all of this data usable by researchers anywhere on any device and really increase access. So a couple other things I want to cover related to this. So last January, NACC launched an electronic data capture work group in collaboration with the Data Core Steering Committee. There's been a lot of people engaged in that effort. It's been wonderful. We actually had a networking event with this group last night. So we have 75 people across 29 ADRCs that are collaborating across 3 subgroups to contribute to this work. Together, this group has spent more than 1,500 hours working on this work together. And this is just an example of how we do not want to build it and hope that folks come. We want to be building these tools in collaboration with the community and make sure that they serve the community's needs. So this work group has made enormous progress since last January. Our key accomplishments were presented at the Data Core workshop yesterday and are summarized here on the slide. I encourage everyone who missed it to watch the recording from yesterday or to visit our EDC workgroup webpage on the NACC website to learn more. So I want to thank all of the electronic data capture workgroup members who have been contributing to this effort, including my co-lead, Sadeshna Das, as well as the subgroup members from NACC, which include leads from NACC, which include Carrie Stevens, Ben Keller, and Laura McLeod. Thank you all for your help and contributions to moving this effort forward. I also want to thank Claire Cassidy, who is a people wrangler extraordinaire and for whom this would not be possible to do this work without her help. So thank you, Claire, as well. I also want to mention that it's not too late to get involved. We encourage anyone who is interested to reach out. Like I said, you can go to our webpage on this and learn more about how you can get involved in one of these groups and helping out. So the next slide I want to go to, hopefully, let's see if this works, is talking about how we will integrate new data streams. So let's talk a bit more about that. So NACC is currently on a mission to modernize data collection, integration, and sharing to advance Alzheimer's research. So why do we want to do this? So a lot is changing with the center's program. We need a modern data pipeline and repository to support these changes that will align us with NIH's overall data science strategy. So there are a lot of different pieces here that I want to talk through. And essentially, NACC is actively working to build a new pipeline and repository that will not only accommodate the UDS v4 data that we're also familiar with, but will also effectively scale to collect and integrate new data streams over the course of our current award cycle and really provide a robust, long-term resource for the community. So we'll be integrating a wide variety of additional standardized data streams and connecting them to NACC IDs. Additionally, we'll be integrating metadata and analysis data from partners like SCAN, NCCRAD, and NIGADS for all ADRC participants. So the NACC data repository will be powered by Flywheel. You'll hear more about that from my colleague Ben at the next talk. And all of the data will be stored in the cloud, connected to NACC IDs. We are also developing a novel, modern search interface that will make all of these data streams searchable and accessible through a one-stop shop for all ADRC data that we call the data front door. As I mentioned, Flywheel serves as the backbone for this system, and Ben will be telling you more about that during the next talk. So I want to say a little bit more about each of these data streams that we will be integrating directly, and I want to start with the current UDS and other current data streams. So as Bud mentioned, we now have longitudinal data for more than 46,000 participants within our database and 7,000 neuropathology data sets. So all of this data will be transitioned into the NACC cloud powered by Flywheel. So that's all happening very soon in the next month or so. In addition to that, NACC currently has around 11,000 legacy MRI images and 500 legacy PET images. This data is valuable, and we want to make it more readily available and usable for researchers. So we will be doing that in partnership with Charlie DeCarli and Beth Mormino's labs. And Beth Mormino has shown that this data is valuable. She analyzed more than 900 legacy PET images and has developed methodologies for harmonizing across these images, and her findings are closely aligned with other studies. So you can reach out to Beth to learn more about this or to ask her questions about this. So next, I want to share a bit more about future data streams that we're going to be integrating into our NACC repository, and also you'll be hearing a bit more about this from other folks at NACC later on. So NACC is currently building a pilot platform to collect and link clinical EHR and claims data with genetic data and our NACC phenotypic data for consented ADRC participants. So we are currently collecting COVID data from all of the ADRCs. I encourage all of you to be collecting that data for all of your participants. Bud mentioned earlier how you can access those forms. In addition, we have collaborated with several ADRCs to develop an EHR spec focused on COVID and ADRD data elements. And Carrie Stevens will tell you more about that when she speaks in a moment. The combined data will be analyzed within a secure enclave at Medrick, and we hope to be able to scale this platform to the full ADRC program. So you'll hear more about that from my colleagues, as I mentioned, later. We're also developing a pilot with Rhoda Al and Alan Levy for collecting UDS and non-UDS data from the clinic and integrating it within the NACC repository. So you'll hear more about that from Sean in a bit. In addition, we will be collaborating with the ADRC Digital Pathology Work Group to develop a pipeline for integrating digital neuropathology metadata and analysis data into the NACC repository, and we hope to be able to share more on that soon. So next, as I mentioned before, we want to integrate metadata analysis data from key partners like SCAN, NCCRAD, and NIGADS for ADRC participants. So this data will continue to be stored at these centers, but I want to share a bit more about how we are planning to approach this work for these three groups. So in the case of SCAN, as I know you're all familiar with this study, so as many of you know, they are focused on collecting standardized MRI and PET images from across the ADRC program. So NACC has been collaborating closely with SCAN to help support and amplify this initiative. I'll be sharing more about this initiative and our collaboration later today, as well as I want to showing off the NACC dashboard, which we recently launched. I'll show that on the next page. You all can go over to meet with Ben Keller at the demo station we'll have set up here later today to learn more about this dashboard. This is actually live data on here right now. And this is an example of the kinds of real-time dashboards that we want to be building for all sorts of data types in the future. So as Tatiana mentioned this morning, we recently collaborated with NCCRAD to return blood-based biomarker assays to the ADRC. So hopefully all of you got that via REDCap last week, and you should have received that. But in the future, we really want to expand on this further. And so we want to make this self-service for the sites. We want all sites to be able to go to the NACC repository and database and be able to look at their own data for these types of samples. In addition, we want to be able to make all ADRC participant biospecimen and blood-based biomarker data available through this mechanism and store all of that connected to NACC IDs within the NACC repository and made that also searchable for investigators outside the ADRC program through the data front door. So we are also seeking to do something in the future similar with NIGADS. And so that's something that we're actively having discussions about currently. And we essentially want to make all ADRC participant genomic and genetic metadata available to sites and researchers through NACC. And we look forward to being able to share more about that and how that's going to work in the future. So I want to talk a bit more about how we will share the data with researchers. So as I mentioned, we're going to be developing a data front door. Our ultimate goal is to have this be the one-stop shop for all ADRC data that's easy to use, self-service enabled, cohort discovery enabled, real-time, and integrated. So this tool will serve as a search, will enable folks to search, research to search across all the data streams that are integrated within the NACC repository and connected by NACC IDs. So once again, we don't want to build it and hope that people come. We want to build a robust tool that is responsive to the community's needs and will help advance the field. So we're collaborating with NCCRAD and NIGADS to define requirements for this interface, and we're eager to get input from all of you on this as well. So we're going to be hosting some focus group sessions in January 2022. And we encourage you to sign up. Many of you actually already have. We'll also be reaching out to ADRC directors to nominate individuals that they think would be great contributors to this. And this will essentially, we'll be having these different data streams connected will be really impactful for the field. So by doing that and having this all connected to NACC IDs and searchable through a single data front door, we really think that this is going to enable folks to be able to ask and answer new questions in Alzheimer's disease. So hopefully I've convinced you that we have a vision and a plan for how we're going to build a streamlined submission system, build an integrated pipeline and database, and also create an expanded search and access portal. So next thing I want to talk about is that NACC is, and this is especially given the meeting and the focus that we have here this week, so NACC is eager to partner with the ADRC community to facilitate more inclusive ADRD research and to advance our understanding of ADRD across diverse groups. I want to share a few examples of how we are doing that currently. So we are, at the moment, collaborating with the CTF to develop new UDS v4 tools to support DEI and disparities research. So you can see Amy Kine's disparities index based on zip code here, and we know that social determinants of health have a big impact on ADRD outcomes. So this new mandatory SEOH form will allow us to capture information on the impact of income, access to healthcare, and discrimination exposure, amongst other things. In addition, we will be collaborating with 2 ADRCs to provide new tools to support more diverse recruitment of participants. So this will include generating Spanish and Chinese translations for UDS v4. Additionally, the telecognitive assessments that we're developing will enable these tests to be taken anywhere in the world on any device, increasing access to these tools. NACC will also be collaborating to promote best practices for responsible management and sharing of Native American and American Native participant data. So we are currently collaborating on a data sovereignty initiative with Indigenous ADRD Advisory Board, which includes Jordan Lewis and Yowei Loon, McLester Davis, apologies. This initiative has been spearheaded by Carrie Gleason, and actually we're having a meeting later this afternoon to discuss next steps for this work together. NACC's role in all of this, in conjunction with NCCRAD and NIGADS, will really be to promote these best practices to the ADRC program to help them advance their recruitment of diverse participants. So we are thrilled to have the opportunity to collaborate with the executive committee and the core chairs for each of the on this DEI-focused meeting. We hope to do more meetings like this in the future. And I look forward to hearing from all of these outstanding speakers that will be joining us to highlight the important work that's both happening in this space and that needs to be happening in this space. NACC will also be collaborating with Dimension Matters to put together a podcast on the DEI focus of this meeting and some of the other DEI-related work that's happening across the ADRC program. And in addition to that, as Bud mentioned, we do have a new DEI-focused new investigator award this year. We encourage you to help spread the word for this and really encourage great scientists to apply for this. So I want to talk a tiny bit more. So this is just to summarize kind of what we're doing here at NACC currently to help facilitate more inclusive ADRD research, to advance our understanding of ADRD and health disparities. So it includes building tools for DEI and disparities research, expanding UDS participant diversity and access, helping to promote best practices, and also supporting DEI-related research. So we're really excited about the impact that we believe these initiatives will have on scientific discovery. This work will provide researchers with access to a wide array of integrated, longitudinal, and standardized data streams for research and analysis. We hope that this will lead to important innovations and algorithms aimed at earlier disease detection and to the development of more impactful therapeutics. The data collected on SEOH will also enable researchers to better understand the impact of SEOH on ADRD. As we align further also with NIH's data science strategy, there will hopefully be more opportunities to build bridges with other NIH big data initiatives. So we're not going to go through all the details on this slide. This is just to show you that we have developed a strategic roadmap at NACC and in collaboration with the CTF for how we're going to transition to UDS4 and rule out some of these associated modernization. This will also be made available through our new UDS v4 webpage, which was emailed out to the whole community a couple of weeks ago. So you can access that at the NACC website. And we are committed to keeping you in the loop as we move forward with this. You can access, as I mentioned, the UDS4 webpage on our website. In addition, we'll continue to send out emails with key updates to the community. And lastly, I want to encourage everyone to get involved. So I've highlighted a few different ways that you can do that. One is by joining our electronic data capture work group. You can sign up to participate in one of our data front door focus groups. In addition, you can apply for an NI award or actually spread the word about our new investigator award, as well as we'll be asking folks to give feedback on Flywheel once that's up and running. And you can always reach out to us with your questions on that, as well as you can always learn more about NACC data by going to naccdata.org. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone for participating and listening, and I will be passing off to our tech team lead, Ben Keller, to talk about Flywheel next. Thank you, everyone.
All right, good afternoon. Glad to be here. Oh, still with Sarah's talk. Okay, so as Dr. Biber said, I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing with the pipeline. And I think it will come as a big surprise to you that we're going to use Flywheel. Okay, so Flywheel is important to our modernization strategy, as Sarah mentioned, because it's going to make data submission, harmonization, dissemination scalable and more user-friendly for the ADRC community. As Sarah showed, we have a lot of things that NACC is being asked to do in the future, and I think that's a big part of why we're moving towards Flywheel. The main purpose of this diagram is just to show that we have a lot of things going on around, data coming in from the ADRCs, data also coming in from our partner centers, and then data going out to researchers and also out as reports to the community to learn about what's going on with your data. So in particular, more detail, why Flywheel? Well, I think last year, if you were at this meeting or attended this meeting, which was virtual at the time, I was talking about a couple different things. One was RedCap and one was Leaf, and there was nothing in between, right? So we didn't really talk about what was going on between. So we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what that is that's going in between. And in listening to the community, I overheard some conversations about Flywheel, and I started looking into Flywheel and other alternatives. What would we do? Build our own things. What I discovered is that Flywheel is actually being used at a number of institutions for imaging, including institutions that are many of your centers are located within. Some of you are actually using Flywheel yourselves. Following up on that, we talked to a number of users, Flywheel users. We reached out to users and did a lot of interviews with people to learn about Flywheel, and we learned how happy they were with using it for their work. And that led up to us doing a 6-week pilot with Flywheel, where we were able to demonstrate that we could go beyond the imaging data and manage the data that we have within the system, or within our current system. In addition, all of those things that Sarah talked about, all of those new initiatives and all of those things, they pose a challenge for NACC to be able to store it within our current systems or systems that we could build ourselves. So Flywheel creates an opportunity for us to satisfy those needs, and that's why we've chosen to go forward with it. So what will you see? This is kind of my list for what will you see within the next year. So the first thing is more consistent ways to submit data. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing is it's going to be easier to see, track, and use your own submitted data. You will actually be able to go into Flywheel and use the interface in order to access your data, to audit it, and see what's there. As Sarah mentioned, it's also scalable to these new data types that are coming in. And you're going to see, well, we already saw a batch of these collaborative proposals that we're working on with centers in order to move forward. And finally, probably the most significant thing, if the rest is not enough, scalable access management, which is actually one of the bigger things that we deal with as the tech team. So how is this going to work? Well, Flywheel is a platform, right? So what it does is it allows us to build up from a base, right? To build the pipeline that you need. So if you are, an ADRC is collecting different types of data, forms, images, these new things, digital phenotype data, Those will be able to be submitted into the Flywheel system. So we have this, you can see in this picture, I've got my red cap and I got my leaf from last year. Those things are still there. We have form data coming in through red cap into Flywheel, and then the other data coming in as well into Flywheel as well. And we can build up this pipeline that's for all of those data types so that we can move forward. Okay, I'm running out of time. Sorry. So key details. Future of NACC data submission, we're using RedCap. We're going to be sharing our QC rules. You can take advantage of those. The other detail is that we're going to have single sign-on, and the directory that Laura McLeod's going to talk about is going to be key in getting your accounts created. No more sending us emails. And I'll leave out the roadmap. And we will be asking for help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Keller. Next, we'll be calling up Sean Mooney.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Mooney. I am an associate director at NACC. I'm also a professor at the University of Washington. And it is really a pleasure to be back here presenting. And I don't know what button I'm supposed to push. There we go. And so what we're going to do over the next 15 minutes, I have 5 minutes, so I have very little time to talk, as I'm going to introduce some of the work that NACC has been doing around COVID-19 and ADRD research. And I will then hand it off to Melissa Lurch, who is, I think, virtual online, who will give us an update on the COVID-19 forms that NACC has been sending out to the ADRCs and the ADRCs have been using. And then Carrie Stevens will talk about data collection for a supplement that we have, a pilot, where we are integrating a number of different data types with 3 ADRCs around advancing COVID research. So our supplement was focused, we knew that there was a challenge with COVID-19. We developed the form that many of you are using. And there was also great interest in collecting other types of data that describe patient phenotype. So for example, clinical data from the electronic health record system, as well as CMS claims data, administrative claims data that could be also useful for research that many of you have been using for individual studies within the ADRCs. And so what we did was developed a relatively modest pilot where we partnered with 3 other sites, Washington University, St. Louis, IU's ADRC, and Columbia University, and focused on showing that we could demonstrate that infrastructure to collect EHR, CMS, and other types of data and integrate it with the existing genetic and phenotypic data that have been collected as part of, like, say, the UDS. So we have an overall kind of workflow that we're working for. So the COVID forms have been made available to all ADRCs. The 3 pilot sites are working very closely with Carrie Stevens and others within NACC to develop a spec for how the different data types will be, like EHR data, for example, will be developed and then submitted to the NACC data platform. And we are also working with a NIA partner, Medric, which can make available CMS data. Basically, you provide the appropriate information to them. They will create a computer environment like in the cloud that they can then populate with CMS data. And then we can integrate other different types of data into that and then make that available to investigators that are appropriate to see that so that they can do data science or analysis. And ideally, we're still working our way toward this. Ideally, we would be able to integrate other data sets like, for example, NIAGA's genetic data. So we think that the ADRC and the UDS data and the type of data that NACC and the rest of the consortium collect have a ton of value for COVID-19 research. As you know, there are a number of other large national COVID-19 projects like Recover, for example, or N3C, which is collecting electronic health record data. And what we feel that the long longitudinal history of really deep phenotypic data would be is complementary and valuable to this population. And so that's something that we're really working with, and we're also reaching out to these other larger consortia like Recover, for example, and looking at opportunities that we may be able to collaborate with them based on the kinds of data that we're collecting here. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Melissa Lurch, who's going to tell us about the forums, and then we'll hand it off to Carrie Stevens, who will give us an update on the overall data platform that I just described as part of the supplement that NACC has. So Melissa, are you online?
I am online. You can hear me now? Okay, great.
We can hear you just
Thanks,
fine.
Sean.
You advance the slides? No, okay.
Hi, I'm Melissa Lurch. I'm the research team manager at NACC. I wanted to give you an overview of the COVID forum development and deployment at NACC. Next slide, please. When the pandemic began, the ADRC program wanted a way to be able to monitor the effect on the population. So 3 forms were developed. The first form is the COVID Technology Assessment Form. The focus of this forum was to determine the best way to follow up with participants during the pandemic. The forum was deployed in June 2020, and 12 ADRCs have participated, and we've collected about 2,000 forms. The second set of forms are the COVID impact forms. The goal was to capture COVID testing and COVID infections, as well as the effect of the pandemic on participants and co-participants. This form was also deployed in June 2020, and we've been able to collect about 5,000 forms from 22 different ADRCs. Next slide, please. I'd just like to highlight a recent publication that came out from OHSU that highlights the results from the COVID technology accessibility forms. I'll let you look at the manuscript yourself to get the details about the models they ran, but I did want to point out that, thank you. I wanted to point out that that participants really do want to do follow-up visits in a variety of methods, using both in-person telephone visits as well as video visits. And this allowed the CTF to develop the cognitive battery specifically to be able to be used in video visits. And this was also deployed in July 2020. Next slide, please. I'd also like to highlight some of the results from the COVID impact survey. This survey data was collected and analyzed from about 4,500 participants in the June data freeze. And we were able to see that COVID infection was very low in the ADRC population. There were about 4% of participants that were COVID positive. And when we analyzed the results from this self-reported changes in depression, anxiety, and behavior, there was no real difference between COVID positive and COVID negative participants. But what we did note is that there was a significant change in COVID positive participants' self-reported changes in memory. And this is consistent with other studies that were shown in the general population. Next slide, please. So as the pandemic evolved, NACC facilitated a dynamic response to the pandemic. We were able to develop another set of forms, an updated set of forms, to allow us to capture vaccination information, outpatient treatments, and hospitalizations. These forms also allow us a mechanism to monitor long COVID data. This new form was released in July 2022 and is currently being translated into Spanish. NACC is working hard on doing the data submission system in REDCap, and we're hoping to have that done later this year. Next slide, please. This dynamic response required an enormous effort from a lot of people, and I wanted to thank all of the people that contributed to this, James Noble and Carlos Crushanga, who designed and developed the version 2 forum, the ADRCs that participated in the surveys, allowing us to modify those forms, the CTF for reviewing and approving the forms, and Katia for doing the Spanish translations with CADLAS as the review mechanism. So thank you everyone for that. Next slide, please. These new forms are available now on the NACC website. They're both in the traditional PDF format with the DDD, as well as a REDCap XML project that you can import and use in your own REDCap instance. The advantages of the REDCap forms is that it can be used dynamically in a waiting room on iPads. You can email them to participants, which we found that 87% of participants from the technology accessibility survey are interested in using email as a mechanism to communicate with ADRCs. And we are currently developing this form into a more dynamic form that we'd be able to reuse and auto-populate for future visits. So please go and visit our website and make sure that your center is also participating in this valuable data collection. And I will pass this over to Carrie Stevens, who will tell you more about how this valuable COVID data will be integrated into a number of data streams. So thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like Charlie has a question. Go ahead.
Hello, yeah. So it looks like that data has already been downloaded. Can we do site-specific downloads of the COVID data, Melissa?
Melissa, can you answer that question?
Can we ask for site-specific information?
I believe the
I
answer
think-
is yes, but she's looking puzzled like she cannot.
I
hear you.
don't know if she can hear you. And
Oh.
actually, can we leave the questions to the end? We have the Q&A at the very end.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, my bad. I'm breaking protocol. Thank you, Sarah. We were a couple minutes ahead. Now we're not. All right. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. I'm Carrie Stevens. Thank you, Melissa, for that nice pass off. I'm going to round us out on the NACC COVID supplement with an update on some specifics of exactly where we're at in this exciting project. So, I just want to highlight, as Sean was pointing out earlier, there's a lot of infrastructure to build for several new data streams that I'll get a little bit more in the weeds on. And there's a huge amount of governance that's really required to do that. I'd say the governance is probably the majority of the lift of this couple-year pilot project that we're well over a year into at this point. Specifically the sites, and again, I want to thank everybody at Indiana University, Washington University, and Columbia, who are our 3 pilot groups working on this for all of the governance work they're doing. There's been a lot of IRB back and forths. We've been meeting directly with IRB committees around this because we're talking about expanding our data collection to electronic health record data and potentially linkage to Medicare data. This is very different than what many ADRCs have had foresight to think about in terms of their consent forms with their cohorts and making sure that we can do that not only for existing participants, but also decedents, and potentially participants that have completed projects with the ADRCs and are no longer reachable for various reasons. So there's a lot of IRB modifications that have been in the works and are fairly well underway, especially that have now allowed for this new COVID-19 data collection form, which you're all used to doing, that sort of standard operating procedure, but also to permission the electronic health record data to be extracted from their local health systems for those participants that seek health care at those local sites, and to be able to send those data de-identified to NACC. We're in the process right now of doing IRB modifications as well for the linkage to the Medicare data. And the reason that's more complicated is because we need to actually include PII, or protected, very sensitive information, directly to MEDRIC, which is a company that the NIA has subsidized and partnered with to be able to provide us linkage through a secure enclave to the Medicare data that they have direct access to through CMS. So the idea here is these data are going to flow, potentially the EHR data to NACC and then to this MEDRIC enclave, but then the CMS data will live in that enclave, and ADRCs will directly share PII to MEDRIC so that they can actually link in the Medicare data with all of the data that NACC can then facilitate sharing into that enclave for analysis. There's also a consortium model that's been developed, and MEDRIC agreements are all being negotiated by NACC at this point, and MEDRIC and the 3 ADRC sites. So the hope here is that we're going to be offering lots of standard operating procedures going forward to expand to the rest of the consortium, which is why we're excited to share all this with you now. As Sarah has shown several times, this image hopefully is getting burned into your memories of sort of this vision of where we're going with all of these various different data streams. I want to point out that as part of this, we're absolutely in conversation with NIGADS and Lisan's team around how NIGADS is also going to be participating in this expansion of data. So our hope is that we'll absolutely be able to include the various important genetics data in this whole data sharing endeavor that we have related to COVID. In terms of developing the EHR data workflow, part of this involves actually developing an electronic health record data specification with the 3 ADRC sites. Part of what we've done is had strategic partnerships with the informatics teams at all 3 of those sites, and I really want to thank our informatics partners, some of which have been co-developing projects with the ADRCs, and some who, but not very deeply. So I just want to say to this group that part of the goal of this, and you know, frankly, something that Sean and I are both very excited at NACC to help promote, is getting you all linked to your informatics teams. Sean and I are faculty that both work on our informatics teams at the UW School of Medicine. We have a lot of tooling within that informatics side to extract and use electronic health record data. And I think this consortium overall amongst the ADRCs is fairly naive to being able to have those deeper linkages made with your EHR systems. So this pilot project is actually building relationships at each of these 3 ADRCs and their informatics teams. And the concrete output of that partnership initially is going to be this electronic health record data specification that informatics teams can consume, respond to, and give a data set back to the ADRCs that then will be sent to NACC for long-term storage. So it's very exciting. We had a bunch of clinical domain experts at the 3 ADRCs also participate and give us potential enhancements to the initial informatics specification that we shared with them. So there's a lot of learning going on, there's a lot of relationship building, and there's a lot of expanded knowledge of what kind of structured data exists that's easy hanging fruit within the electronic health record that we could be joining together with all the amazing data that NACC already cultivates. In doing this, how many of you have heard of the OMOP data model? Very few. Okay, so for those of you, this is another educational point that's exciting to share with you. OMOP is a standard data model that's nationally been adopted on many levels. There's a giant effort around COVID, for example, that Sean just mentioned you may not have caught, called N3C, for example, and it harmonizes on OMOP. How many of you have heard of PCORNet? Okay, so more of you. So PCORNet, about 1/3 of all the PCORNet sites actually standardize on the OMOP data model. So this has all happened within the last decade, where this is a particular data model that helps with harmonization. So think of it like UDS, but for electronic health record data in a way. So we're standardizing on this OMOP data set. We're increasing NACC's ability to understand OMOP and actually link to that. That's going to allow us to also modernize further into lots of other informatics data sharing that's going on. So this pilot project is actually building a lot of these infrastructure layers, so it's pretty exciting. We're also developing, as I mentioned, a workflow that's going to go into this MEDRIC enclave, which is really all about trying to make Medicare data accessible in linkage with all of the NACC data, NIGADS, NCRED, et cetera, data that we all work to share together. So MEDRIC is going to be providing access again to that Medicare CMS data through a secure enclave. They are not able to permission and send those data, just to be really clear, to NACC, and they're not able to send those data direct to the ADRCs. But the NIA has invested quite a bit of time in subsidizing this partnership together and asked us explicitly to go pursue this and see if we can enable you guys being able to access this enclave down the road. And that's what these 3 pilot sites will be able to do in these larger linked data sets with all the permissions in place. So again, lots of governance. We're aiming towards a pilot study, really a demonstration test of this system that will be coming up over this next year. You can see just some counts. Sorry, the numbers are so small on the screen here. They're fairly modest, but the idea here is that the 3 sites have actually been combing through all of their different data, all these IRB changes, all of these agreements we have to sign, et cetera, figuring out who's eligible. And the counts, we're going to have several hundred people that are potentially completely permissioned and ideally data shared in these next several months. Very exciting. Last, I want to just end with the excitement piece around what are the kinds of questions that we think building this kind of infrastructure can enable. This is certainly just, I think, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can potentially pursue looking at, but just to give you some sense and whet your appetite for why do this work, because there is work here involved to expand in this way, but I think it's extremely exciting. You know, the first is really to be able to identify genetic and other biomarkers actually that may be associated with the risk of developing dementia or other cognitive complaints after a COVID-19 infection. You all, I'm sure, are reading about it all over the place, not just scientifically, but in the news around these poor outcomes, and we really are positioned as a consortium to do this in a very powerful way with a giant comprehensive data set that we have. A second idea is to be able to quantify the polygenic risk of poor outcomes of Alzheimer's dementia and related Alzheimer's disorders and related dementias with or without a history of COVID-19. And then also investigating long-term effects around COVID-related cognitive impairment as well. And that also involves potentially social determinants of health and being able to look at subgroups and people that are impacted who might have multifactorial kinds of influences around those poor outcomes. And then, of course, being able to look at healthcare utilization and access, which is a favorite area of mine, especially when it comes to disparities related to both COVID-19 and ADRD. So I hope you guys are excited that this is a potential that we're going to be doing. NACC is really hoping that the vision here is that we're going to be doing this across all 37 ADRCs and starting with these 3. So thank you very much.
Okay, hello again. I'm back up here because I'm going to talk to you about SCAN. Okay, so what is NACC doing to amplify SCAN, and how is SCAN going? Those are the things I'm going to talk about. So SCAN, as I believe you all know, is focused on standardizing MRI and PET data collection from across the ADRC program. And NACC has been very involved in this initiative. So we are collaborating with SCAN to help amplify their work. And I'm going to give some examples of that, but I'll just talk a bit about how this is kind of all laid out. So sites submit the raw images to LONI. SCAN then analyzes those images, calculates, does QC, calculates SUVR, calculates volumes. All of that data, that summary and analysis data, will be sent to NACC. The images will continue to live at LONI, but we will be working to integrate that analysis data as well as the metadata about those images into the NACC repository and connecting them to NACC IDs, and also working to make that data available to researchers. I want to share a bit about how SCAN is going. There's been a lot, this has really been ramping up over the past 6 months or so. And so you can see some of the numbers here, just a summary. So there have been more than 1,400, data has been submitted for more than 1,400 participants for MRI scans. 790 PET scans have been PET scans have been submitted for 790 participants, and then both MRI and PET scans have been submitted for more than 400 participants. A little bit more summary data here, focusing here on PET. So more than 1,000 PET scans have been received from 15 ADRCs to date. You can see here kind of what the breakdown is here in terms of how those are labeled for both amyloid and tau. For MRI, there have been more than 1,200 exams that have been submitted from 27 ADRCs. You can also see what the breakdown is there, and that those are primarily T1 and FLAIR scans. And NACC has been doing a lot, as I mentioned, to try and amplify this initiative in collaboration with both SCAN and LONI. So we developed and deployed a scan checklist. And this checklist, essentially the purpose of it was to serve as a roadmap for sites, to help sites get scan ready. So it's intended to serve as a standard tool for assessing scan readiness. It is based in REDCap and can be updated by sites in real time. So 20 sites have actually already filled this out, the 20 that we interviewed as part of our scan evaluation, which I'll share more about in a moment. And 100% of the sites that we queried found that the checklist was helpful or thought that it would have been helpful if they had had it in advance of getting scan ready. So we'll be surveying all sites on scan readiness in early November, so stay tuned for that because you will probably get sent a REDCap form very similar to this one that is intended really to help you walk through those steps and make it as easy as possible for you. In addition, myself and Sterling Johnson and also Cerise Johnson interviewed, Cerise Elliott, I'm sorry, hi Cerise, interviewed 20 ADRC sites to discuss scan progress and to identify roadblocks. So we really wanted to identify how to best support and amplify sites' participation in the SCAN initiative. And also wanted to say a bit about how we selected scans for those interviews. So those folks were either sites that had SCAN co-investigators or sites that had representatives on the imaging steering committee or had received an admin supplement for SCAN participation. So we interviewed ADRC directors, imaging core leaders, administrators. These were really, really helpful to do. And really the outcome of this was that we identified some common site challenges that were barriers to participation. And we really gathered all of that information, and that really helped inform the development of several tools and solutions to really amplify the SCAN initiative. I'm going to share a little bit about some of those today. I won't be able to talk about all of them because there's a lot going on related to this. But you can see here, this is how the PET submissions have gone up. These are the cumulative number of submissions for scans for PET by month. So this is going up. This is very good. You can see how that overlaps with the interviews. We have a hypothesis about that, that maybe having interviews encourages folks to also submit more images. Similar thing was seen with MRI. Here. In addition, I want to talk to you about some of the solutions that we're building. So these all came directly out of these interviews, out of talking to sites and hearing what they really needed support with. So one of the things that we're going to spend most time on today is really looking at this real-time scan dashboard that we're building. So there's a couple different pieces to this. So there is a public dashboard, which actually we are launching this week, and you will have a chance to demo here with Ben Keller, our tech lead, out in the hallway later today. There also is a scan site-specific dashboard. There's both a PET version of that and an MRI version of that for each site. And those dashboards basically you can download all of your data submission records to date. You can get up-to-date information on the QC status of your scans. That's all available there. So some other things we're building that I won't have time to talk to you about today, but I want you to have on your radar, is that we are also are collaborating with SCAN and LONI to develop streamlined and harmonized SCAN resources. So that means that no matter where you go, whether it's the NACC website or looking at your metadata form, whatever it is, it's all going to have the same information using the same language. So it's very, very easy to be able to understand what you need to do to participate in the study. We're also going to be changing the way that we assign NACC IDs, which will have a direct impact on this project. That will be something that is going to be scalable to a number of different data streams. We'll talk more about that at an upcoming meeting. But in addition to that, we're going to be developing a SCAN web portal that is where it'll live on the NACC website. That is where the dashboard will live, and we'll be able to access the checklists. We'll be able to update your information in real time, check the QC status of your image submissions, et cetera. And we're also going to be optimizing MRI and PET data search through the data front door that I've talked about quite a bit. So as far as what's going to live there, that will include metadata analysis data, and we'll also have cohort selection tools built in. So what about the SCAN dashboard? So this is the public dashboard. This is available right now. This was finished like other pieces of this, which include the site-specific MRI and PET dashboard. you can see those over there on the right-hand side. And I want to zoom in, pretend I'm clicking on that first one right there. So this is the MRI site-specific dashboard for a made-up site. This is not real data. This is made-up data. But essentially, these will be available soon as well. And sites can track the QC status of their MRI submission. So this was a direct response to sites not knowing, how do I find out whether my images were accepted? How do I check and make sure that all of the data I think I submitted for XYZ participants was actually submitted for those participants? The answer to that now is you can go to the scan dashboard, and you can check that in real time. So you can, if you're wondering whether it's past QC, this is where you would go to find that out. So this has a record of all sites, all of their MRI submissions to date, and once again, it's downloadable as a CSV file with just one click. So we also have a PET site-specific dashboard for each site. So that's where sites can also check the QC status of their PET submissions. It includes a record of all, once again, all the PET data that's been submitted by that site to date, and this, once again, is ready to go. So here's that figure again. We keep showing it because this is really an example of one key thing from this figure, of the kinds of reporting and real-time dashboards that we are building for SCAN in this case, but we want to build for a lot of other data streams in the future. So come to our dashboard demo station. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can come play around with this dashboard, see how things are looking, give some feedback as well. So that's going to be happening today and tomorrow at the times listed here. And I'm sure many of you are wondering, well, when will I be able to use this data? That's what I would be wondering if I were you. So as I mentioned, we have just launched the SCAN public dashboard. So ADRC and researchers can view their summary data for the SCAN initiative at each ADRC. In addition, in Q1 of 2023, we're going to be launching the SCAN site-specific dashboards, and that's where ADRCs will be able to access their own SCAN data at NACC. So ADRCs will be able to access and download their own SCAN data. It's connected to NACC IDs. It will list the participant IDs as well. They can check the QC status. As I mentioned, the summary data and analysis data will ultimately be available there as well. And then in addition to that, if they want to get the raw data, they'll have to go do a data request through Loney. In Q2 of 2023, that SCAN data will be accessible to all investigators. So the minimal version viable product of that is that summary and analysis data will be available via NACC data request. So you can, basically those all be connected to NACC IDs. And then once again, for the raw image at that stage, you'll have to go to Loney to do a data request. In the future, we are working with SCAN to make all of this data searchable and accessible to all investigators through the data front door. So that will be anyone can use this anywhere for ADRD research. It will include analysis data. It will include a cohort selection tool that will be available to be able to search across multiple integrated data streams, including the standardized MRI and PET imaging data and analysis data. And then also there will be raw image access that you'll be able to click a button and it will submit an automatic request to Loney. So coming this November, more surveys. So we'd like you all to update your SCAN readiness using the SCAN MRI and PET checklist. If you've already done this as one of the 20 sites we interviewed, now is a good time to update that if progress has been made. Once again, this is also intended to help serve as a roadmap for walking you through the process of getting SCAN ready. And in the future, ADRCs will be able to access their SCAN readiness anytime. So I want to thank, there's a lot of people. This has been a huge collaboration between NACC and the SCAN MRI team and the SCAN PET team, led by Cliff Jaggis by William Jaggis and Cliff Jack, respectively. There's also been a number of other SCAN contributors listed here. Loney has, of course, been a key partner in all of this. I also want to thank some of the key NACC team members that have been really instrumental to building all of this. Brittany Hale has done an incredible job of pulling together all of the pieces for this, coordinating interviews with 20 sites, keeping us all on track. It's been incredible. Jivan did an amazing job of building the SCAN dashboard with lots of input from Ben Keller on the NACC tech team. So just want to really give a special call out to those folks as well as others in the NACC team that were involved and contributed to this. And I want to mention that Bill Jaggis and Cliff Jack will be available for questions during the Q&A at the end of the NACC session. So thank you very much. And next up, Sean Mooney's coming back up.
All right. Okay, so I have 10 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about digital data. I hope this is interesting. I think that these presentations and sessions are a great way for us to communicate what we're thinking about at NACC and what we've been sort of working on, because we're going to request feedback from you and really would like to, collaborate and partner with you on, these various kind of new things that we're thinking about doing. What I'm going to talk about today is something that is got a lot of interest, but I think has a lot of variability about in terms of what's going on. And what I'll do is I'm going to just start by walking you through kind of how I view the world, and then you guys can tell me how I'm right or wrong, and we can have a discussion either after this talk, after the session, or after the meeting. So there's a lot of interest in moving to digital. So here's just an example. You could imagine taking like a Mocha and putting it into an iPad. I'm not saying that that's what we're going to do. I'm just saying that that's something that you could do. And we're seeing more and more kind of movement of paper-based things, paper-based instruments, and being put into digital things like iPads or other devices. And there's a lot of interest in doing this. There's tons of advantages, some of which is really obvious, right? This gives us structured data that we can compute with. I know that at the University of Washington, we have challenges computing with structured cognitive tests that are not unstructured or like present in notes and clinical texts and things like that. And when we want to do research, we'd really like to be able to have access to structured data. There's also, it's a lot easier to preserve this data. I think an enormous amount of paper-based things are scanned and then attached to a patient's medical record. Sometimes that's very hard to find. The scanning takes work. I know that, again, at the UW health system, we've got a team that does scanning still and, puts paper things attached to records. And then, of course, there's less waste. The way that I sort of think about this, and again, I think this is just sort of my model that I work with in my head, is that I sort of think about digital stuff in three basic bins. The first bin is things that are currently or could be clinically administered that could be done by a variety of different digital modalities. Then, particularly in the world of post-COVID-19, there's a lot of interest in telehealth, and there are also a lot of tools that can be remotely administered. And so that's sort of the second bin. And then the third bin is digital health things that can be collected outside of the clinic. That could be either passive things, like I'm wearing an Apple Watch that's timing my talk right now that's going to buzz when I get out of time. And it is also passively collecting things like the number of steps I'm doing. It's collecting my heart rate and my temperature and other things like that. That's a very passive approach to collecting data that has a lot of interest from the research community. But then there could also be active things where it could, maybe be, some sort of a test or something that I do that would collect data that then could give a result to me or a provider or somebody else. So this is sort of the model that I think about when I do this. And then that's not the only axis of the data, right? I mentioned already, talked about active versus passive data collection. So passive data is data that can accumulate over time. There's no specific test or instrument associated with it. We're starting to see passive data being integrated into electronic health record systems. So for example, patients at some places can sync the number of steps they're doing from their iPhone or their Apple Watch. Some folks can sync their Strava profiles with their medical record. And sometimes that data is even available for research use within health systems. So if you're interested in that kind of data, you could look into that. And then, and then there's active, then again, the more active like tests, like things people would take either clinically, remotely or outside of a clinic experience. And then, of course, there's things that are established. Like, so many of you use established tests through, like, say, an iPad. But then there's things that are really novel, like stuff you'd write an R01 about or an R21 about. And then there's things that are related, that are validated versus innovative, and then of course the in-clinic versus out-of-clinic. And so I think it's really important. So what we've been doing is collaborating with Rhoda Au at Boston University and Alan Levy at Emory to who've been doing a lot of work in this area, to start thinking about how NACC as a coordinating center can help facilitate that. This is in my view, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong later, this is totally the digital Wild West. Everybody's doing their own thing. I can't tell you how many times an investigator at the UW will approach me and said, I've got some cool technology and I think it's predictive of dementia. And I would love to do something with it. There's tons of that going on. You probably are all doing this yourselves. And there's very little standardization. So we're totally in like a discovery space, but not a lot of standardization space. What is NACC's role? So what I see as NACC's role also could be discussed is that we really should work with things that are established and kind of help harmonize and standardize them across the ADRC. So these are things that are maybe not super out there in terms of whether they've been demonstrated or not, but things that really we all should be collecting, and we should all be collecting in a similar way. Then the other side of that is the more innovative stuff, which is a lot of where we're at right now, and that is how can we help facilitate that, maybe by putting together like a common platform, like we're all using like maybe the same devices or something like that, but we're still doing discovery, we're facilitating but not, kind of imposing discovery-based research on everybody. Again, that's just my thoughts of how to do that. And then I think, this brings up a ton of opportunity to collect these digitally established tools, whatever they may be, that could potentially, show that they are, equally as good as the traditional ways of collecting, maybe more efficient, and to help kind of help work with ADRCs to roll them out, to make them, to provide that technology to be more useful. The one thing I haven't mentioned that I'm only going to have one slide on with a fancy, I guess it's over here, a fancy stock image of is AI. And these tools don't have to be machine learning, advanced data science or artificially intelligent, driven, like in a supervised way, but they could be. And I think there's an enormous opportunity as we collect data to start integrating other types of data to be able to make predictions about, patients' phenotype, trajectory, et cetera. But again, I want to make sure that I sort of think in my brain about two kind of different things, because there's a lot of work that's going on in the AI space right now, and these AI-based methods, I think, have a long way to go before they're validated. And I think we should think about them maybe a little bit different than like a traditional instrument that would be then filled out and scored. Tons of digital health tools that are out there. And I think there's a lot of needs. The workflows for using these sort of digital tools like Fitbits or iWatches or iPhones or whatever create different workflows. I talk about this a lot, but like my Apple Watch, when it collects the number of steps I do, that gets synced with the cloud, and then goes to a place that's not an ADRC and it's not NACC. And if we were to collect that data, we would have to alter our workflow, because normally our workflow is ADRC collects data, they do things with data, and eventually it gets to NACC. And so we have to kind of think about how that changes things. And these tools are becoming crazy connected. Like, I got a flu vaccination when I was getting my COVID booster a month ago or so, and I'm like, driving away in my car, and I didn't even get out of the parking lot before my wrist buzzed and said, "You have a flu vaccination." And I was like, holy moly. And so it's really impressive about how all of this is kind of shaping up to work, and I think it's also an opportunity for research. So we're working on a really super modest pilot where we just really want to take a couple of digital instruments or measures and that are already kind of subject of research studies that are ongoing within the consortium. And when I say a small number, we're talking like maybe 5 or less. and then show that we can take the existing workflow that's going on for those research studies and then harmonize them and bring them back and bring them back to NACC, and then collaborate with, I don't know, 1 to 3 ADRCs to demonstrate a pilot that we can all do this together and figure out who does QC, when does QC happen, where does data sit, does it sit at the ADRC site, does it sit in the cloud, when does the ADRC have access, when does NACC have access to data, that sort of thing. So what we're looking at the moment is 5 different tests that we're sort of evaluating. One is UDS-like tests like digital clock drawing or category naming, and then also some non-UDS tests like UCSF TabCat or VisMet that was developed at Emory, I think, and as well as the Candy Theft picture description, and then collaborating with the ADRCs that are going to participate in this, as well as with Linus Health, which is a platform that a number of sites are collaborating with using, demonstrating that the ADRCs can collect that data, it will go into Linus's cloud, and then NACC at some point will get access to that data as well, and then the ADRCs and Linus and or NACC will all participate in QCing that data and demonstrating that data is integratable, and then that will flow into the data platform that you've been hearing a lot about during this presentation, and then that will be made available back to ADRCs and also back to investigators. Again, lots to think about there. The thing I'm going to close with in the last minute that I have here to talk today is I also want to talk about something that I'm really excited about that I'm hoping you'll hear more about, and I figured this was a good place to kind of fit this in, and that is leveraging open data science challenges to deal with kind of fancy advanced data as a way to generate interest and use of kind of new data that's being collected as pilots or R01s or work within the ADRCs. And I assume that some of you have worked with, like, say, Dream Challenges or Kaggle, this Google-owned platform that enables data science challenges, where you can take basically fancy data that you think can answer a question, and you know what the answer to the question is, but nobody else knows what that answer is. And what you can do is you can take that data you think could answer that question and basically throw it at an army of data scientists. Kaggle, I believe, for example, has, I think, more than 10 million data scientists in their network. The Dream Challenges, I know, is like on the order of about 100,000 data scientists. And you can send them data, and that they can basically build data science answers to those questions. They submit their answers back, and since we're the only ones that know the answer, we can then assess how well each of those different teams did. My lab has been doing this for decades now, participating in these as an organizer, a predictor, or an assessor, or an advisor. And I would love to see this kind of activity happening within the ADRC consortium, because I think it'll get, as we become more advanced in the data that we collect, I think it'll really engage kind of those cool data scientists that love to solve really neat problems. And so one of the things that we'd love to do with the digital pilot that we're working on is to take some advanced data set, like, say, voice recordings of clinic, and if we, and then ask some question that we would like to have answered based on those recordings, and then we can put in, a compliant, secure, privacy-protecting platform that would enable data scientists to be able to build models and answer questions, and then what we could do is evaluate whether that data is useful or not for, predicting whatever it is that we're trying to predict from that. Anyway, so that's something that I would kind of want to throw out there as we start collecting digital data. I think the opportunity for these sort of bake-offs with data scientists becomes much, much greater. All right, I am going to stop there. I think one thing I want to point out is that we are going to have a digital footprint survey. We've heard a lot about surveys. We're really grateful that you fill them out. And you're going to get another one on this and talking about what are the sort of tools, again, thinking about the framework that I presented toward the beginning of this presentation. And I look forward to talking to you outside of the context of these sessions about things that are possible and things that we might want to think about. So thank you very much. And I will now pass it off to Laura McLeod, who's going to tell us about the new NACC directory. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura McLeod. I'm the Senior Red Cup Administrator with NACC. I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking about the new NACC directory. Sarah mentioned in her talk, and you've heard this as a theme throughout the NACC session, that NACC is expanding its role in support of ADRCs, and so the NACC directory is one example of that. So the purpose of the NACC directory is to provide a resource with contact information about ADRCs, NACC, and AD and ADRD partners. Previously, you might have heard of something called the ADRC Personnel Directory, and that was a static document, and it was limited to only ADRC information. So what we're launching is version 1.0 of this directory. It is comprehensive, spanning across multiple ADRD organizations. It's online, interactive, and dynamic. So in terms of the content of the directory, we are in phase 1 right now. So what is available today is the ADRC leadership and committee information. We're going to have several more phases. The next one will include the ability for individuals to update their information, and with their consent, we will publish it online. And then the final 3, 4, and 5 phases have to do with supporting operational workflows. So things like the monthly reporting and freeze process, portal and flywheel access management, and listserv management. So the advantages of the directory is that the information is always up to date. It's online, and when people update their information, it automatically gets pushed to the live directory. As I mentioned, members can update their information themselves. Any viewer can search the interface for content that you might need. It allows members to find and connect with others, and I think most importantly, it's easier for researchers across the world to identify potential collaborators from across the ADRC program. So there's some key components to the directory. They're either related to content management or access management. So in terms of content management, all of that happens in REDCap. Members will be able to update their own information via a private survey link that gets sent to them. Center administrators are able to log into the REDCap project and update their center information. And then our NACC staff has the ability to update committee member information. We're going to be building an authentication system, and that partners with the third item that you see, which has to deal with the published content. So there's essentially 2 versions. There's a private version that people will need a login to access, and that will contain like the full version of the directory that includes email addresses. The public version is the more generic content, so that won't include any email addresses. So the directory is live now. You can go to this URL or scan this QR code. And I am going to move on to the next slide, but this QR code is available in the flyer that you received in your folder. So when you go to the directory, you're going to see that it's sectioned off into different content sections, and they're all clickable links. So you can just click on them to find whatever content you need. And this is going to be an iterative process, and we want your feedback. We're building this for you, and so we want to have a discussion with you about what you want to see in the directory, what's most useful for you. So I'm going to have an information table today. I'm going to be out in the hallway right after this session to answer any questions, show you the directory. As well, tomorrow I'll be there in the morning and in the afternoon, again in the hallway, to have discussions with you and get your input. So again, our timeline is that right now, the ADRC leadership, so that's core leaders, directors, center administrators, that's available to you. Next up will be individuals, and then we have these operational workflows that we're going to be folding in. We're also going to have ongoing automated reminders that will be sent out to members and center administrators to go into the directory and update your information on a biannual basis. And those reminders are generated by REDCap. I'd like to thank all of the center administrators for their help in making this happen, and also want to call out my NACC colleagues who have been really helpful in making this come to fruition. And so with that, I believe we're at the end of our session, and so I invite my NACC colleagues to join me on the stage for our Q&A portion. And I believe we have a couple of virtual audience members who can also answer questions.
Yep, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, so if you have a question, please come up to the mic stand. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I should sit there.
Okay, any questions?
So, I have a particular question. I'm really excited to see our ability to integrate with medical record, et cetera. But to my knowledge, that will make our marginalized populations even less likely to be represented in the richness of this data. Because in most cases, they're not receiving care, at least in our setting, and I think in other settings, at the tertiary medical center where the ADRC is located. And so I think one of the things that I'm most concerned about as we've added on all of these additional outcome measures as well, is whether or not we're going to see how representative our data collection is. So of our COVID responses, what percentage we're getting. I'm not expecting an answer. I'm saying these are the things we have to possibly monitor. What percentage are actually submitting those COVID questionnaires? And even more importantly, in the absence of the ability to confirm with medical records, why do we think we would have valid information or equally valid information from the self-reports on those surveys if we don't have, I mean, we just made these up. I mean, I know the best of us made them up. I'm not suggesting that they weren't well intended, but as we've looked at our COVID work, we've discovered that the questions are understood differently, that the data collections, I'm not sure it's collecting reliable data. So what's our plan for ensuring that we're collecting reliable data with those?
And that last piece, do you mean in terms of the COVID questionnaire data?
Well,
Or do you mean in general?
well, the COVID questionnaire and many of our new questionnaires, I mean, the one thing that if I'm not mistaken, we found after 10 years and 500 people that the extensive FTLD battery added nothing and is being dropped, right? So how long, do we have that timeline paced so we can say, maybe we don't have to do this 500 times to know that the extra burden isn't worth it?
Yeah, you're bringing up several issues. I don't know if I will do justice to all of them, so I'll try to do my best and sort of start with the beginning of what you said and get to the end. I think it's really important to be thinking about disparities in service access and the huge push that the whole consortium is making to get people out of the community to come sign up for studies. So you're just bringing up a really important issue that we have a lot of participants now that are not being seen at local ADRCs, and I think that's why we're excited potentially, at least for the Medicare side of the connectivity, although obviously there are lots of folks that are uninsured, et cetera, that we would love to be able to get into studies that might not be represented there either. So this really is a start to be thinking about how we can build towards this. And that takes some permissioning to even just be able to access where people might get some health care. There's also data in terms of, 25% of the population not getting primary care but being serviced through the emergency departments that I think represent hopefully some of the cohorts that we'll be capturing. So I think it's not a reason to not necessarily try to build these bridges, but a really important set of issues you're bringing up for when we think about fit for use for the studies we might want to do. Go ahead, did you want to respond to that?
So I think this is a wonderful point. So do you think in those 3 sites, are we collecting how many people say, no, I don't want you to have my Medicare data or my medical data? I mean, we actually do collect medical data. We have permission, although it's not yet hooked to the electronic record.
I don't want to speak for our champions directly, and some of them may even be right here and can answer, but I think that issue the issue around will our participants be comfortable with this ethically? Can we do this to them, with them, is the spirit. And so they actually did do some work to go reach out to stakeholders and talk with them, and got a very wonderful, resounding, please do this. We want you guys to have these data.
That's interesting. We don't find that. We find that, and I'm glad to hear. It would be great to get that published to show that people say, "Oh yes, I'm glad to have you have my Medicare data."
Yeah, that's a great, yeah, thank you. I think, there's a lot built into this pilot that you're pointing out that has been a lot about not just governance, but ethics in relationship building, et cetera. I think the question about validity of the data is a great one as well. I think in terms of the forms data, I do want to say it's been a real challenge to get the form data through our process, the ADRC consortium. I love all of you guys. Everybody works really hard. The CTF, is doing a lot of unfunded, mandated kind of work. It's not set up to be a process to be responsive in the pandemic. So it is a challenge that we have in trying to push through new forms, evaluate data quickly. We're thinking a lot about that at NACC in terms of how we can have the data ready and on hand to look at these things really rapidly. And I think the pandemic is challenging all of us to do that much more rapidly. So it's a real challenge. And I really do want to thank, doctors Jamie Noble and Carlos Cruchega for really championing the content that are in those current forms. They were not part of the CTF. We're kind of an extension of that. And we do need help. We need help from all of you to rapidly be looking at that form because it's outdated the second we hit send, essentially, with this pandemic.
Jose Cavazos, South Texas ADRC rec leader. I noticed that in the table, in the directory, very nicely, they are all listed, the rec leaders, but there's no specific clickable information tab. But one thing that our scholars are asking is to have a space for them. They are the next generation of our workforce. So if we had the opportunity of creating a list of rec scholars, that would be very helpful for collaborations between themselves, as well as for other people to recognize them.
Thank you for that suggestion. I appreciate it.
Are there any other questions?
Can't believe you don't have questions for us, Val. We're going to.
I did get one email actually from an ADRC colleague, and I just wanted to make it clear that the dashboards that we're building for SCAN do not reflect counts for legacy MRI or PET data. So I want to make sure that that's really clear to folks. This is the data that was submitted to the SCAN initiative according to the SCAN protocols. So I just want to make that clear. It does not reflect the legacy MRI or PET data. Chad.
Chad Murchison, UAB Exploratory ADRC. So we've talked a lot about additional forms that we're adding, new methods of data collection, things like this. And we've been very mindful of what this means in terms of the burden that we're adding to the participant. But anyone who listened to me talk yesterday knows that one of the major considerations I often have is what is the additional burden that's being put on the staff and the centers who are already stretched very, very thin. And as we're building out these sort of digital pilots and things like this, what kind of considerations are being put into place to ease a lot of the process for the centers as we just kind of continue to ramp up with groups that can barely keep their heads above water as is?
Are you talking about for specific kinds of data or just the data streams in general?
I often think in general, but when I think about some of the specific stuff, I think a lot of the stuff that Sean described is just fascinating. I mean, that just tickles me to no end. But what can we do rather than use AI, for example, to help with like decision making? Because I'll be honest, like I don't trust Spotify to like pick my music for me, like let alone actually do like diagnoses. But are there ways that we can leverage this kind of data collection to help with determinations of what is wrong with this clock, for example, and things like that? Again, just improving the process to simplify the entire workflow, especially as we try to move doing more and more digital data collection.
This is a great question. I think the burden on sites is an important thing for us to consider when we develop pilots. For the digital pilot, again, it's a pilot that we're developing at this point is super modest. It's very narrowly focused. It's only a small number of measures, and it's with ADRCs that want to participate. and collaborate with NACC in terms of developing it. I could see a lot of opportunities potentially for making collection more efficient through the use of technology. For example, something that we've seen in the past that's happening at the University of Washington is we've improved just broadly, this isn't just an ADRD thing, but broadly improved how we collect data through forms in REDCap because we've connected an interface to our electronic health record system, and we can auto-populate fields that normally would have to be abstracted out of a chart. And so, those sort of things actually do improve, very simple change can improve efficiency of data collection, and we would hope that something similar would happen here.
I think one other thing about that too is that for a lot of these new data streams, we're trying to approach these through pilots so that we really can understand, right, what is the burden that this creates and what will need to be put in place to be able to make these initiatives successful moving forward. So that's partly why Carrie talked about in our COVID study that we're doing how there's a huge governance obstacles, right, that need to be overcome in order to be able to successfully collect those data streams from the site. So that's really important information to have to develop some best practices as well, so we understand how we can successfully scale this to the Fall ADRC program. I think with SCAN, right, there's other initiatives potentially coming on like Clarity that will help hopefully, if they're funded, alleviate some of the burden on sites for submitting standardized MRI and PET data, right? So these are the sorts of things we're trying to look at and help support as well. And as far as like an algorithm, you not being able to pick the music you want to listen to, I think it is important to, understand the limitations of these things, but also, for example, as we're working with Rhoda Au and Alan Levy to put together this digital pilot, we're thinking we're going to be starting with 2 standard UDS tests, like the digital clock, right, is one of them. And yeah, you're still going to have your normal digital clock data that you would always have, but maybe on top of that, you also get a score, right, because there's been tons of this data collected, and that score may be informative, right, for helping you understand where that participant is at in their progression of the disease. So there's not replacing it, but just sort of adding to that information.
I see we have a question on this side, but I want to just add one more quick thing, and then we'll get to your question. And Chad, thanks as always for speaking for the consortium in a really productive way, because I think your point around limited resources is huge and drowning data cores and the entire centers with all of the megalith work that you guys all do. I think I just want to give a shout out to NIA that they really understand that these are new things, and so part of what NACC's trying to do, as Sarah's saying, is facilitate quantifying that for NIA and saying this is what it takes for an ADRC to do this next thing. So the COVID pilot is similarly that way, where we're really trying to track how much does it take, how much money does it take to pay the informatics people, how much data core time does it take, how much clinical core time does it take to reconsent everybody. So there are lots of implications for sure in all of this that are causing a burden, and we're really trying to quantify that so that we can figure out how to fund it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So Julie Schneider, Rush University. So one of my questions is, there's a lot of legacy cohorts in our groups, such as religious order study or the 90+ study, that collect very good cognitive data, and they want to share it with NACC, but it's very difficult to do. And I was wondering if there was thoughts behind using some of the harmonization that Paul Crane and his group has been using to harmonize batteries, cognitive batteries, rather than making our participants go back and do another story or memorize something different, because that's what we're being asked to do right now, is actually go to our participants and ask them to redo cognitive testing so that we can be in these different cohorts.
We're staring at you, Bud, if you want to try to respond. But I think
But this is your seat, by the way.
to help Bud out while he stands up, I mean, I do think in my book, the CTF has a huge role in this that maybe is not so much on NACC, but go ahead, Bud.
Well, look, just a second here. I guess I can answer from here. Yeah, that would be a really important thing to do. One from the standpoint of the ADSP harmonization side, to harmonize those different tests and so on. That's something we could probably apply a lot of things right now in order to do that. I think in order to harmonize some of the other things that may be a little bit different than neuropsych tests, which are a little bit easier maybe that you can use IRT for, we'd have to look a little bit closer. It's a little bit harder work to actually look at the elements and see how close they are to be able to transfer data. Then then we'd be in the space of thinking about, well, how do we want to pull those data or leave those data out for people to analyze, with the caveat that these have been harmonized rather than being primary, I guess you would say, or that we could create some overall harmonization of everything that we have to, I don't know, kind of make a larger data set. I think there's a lot of kind of procedural questions that we'd have to think about, you know, in terms of how the analysis would go and what sort of inferences we could draw from the analysis to make sure we were getting more signal than noise. But, you know, I think all these things are possible. It's just thinking about where we are with this and I don't know, getting some other people involved so that we can think about what's the best way to do this and how long is it going to take and that sort of thing.
It's just a shame to have all this data that can be utilized by the larger group that can't be merged. So NACC has all this data, but it can't merge with all these other population, or community-based studies that have so much to offer. So it would, and NACC tends to be very clinically, clinic-based versus community-based, which is one of the issues that comes up with the, diversity and equity. So you're really losing that by not being able to capture some of these other cohorts. So I'm not blaming you. What I'm saying is that this would be an initiative that I think would be really important to move the science forward.
Julie, I want to add to that. Bud and I and some others at NACC submitted a very large R01 that sadly NIA didn't fund, with Carlos Cruchega championed, that actually worked with Paul Crane and others to do exactly what you're talking about. So I do think that one of the challenges, Bud's saying, there's a lot to figure out in these pieces and it takes a lot of funding. Right. And sadly, it's easier to go burden the participants to recollect data than it is to do the groundwork it takes to bring it together, even though that long-term would be fantastic. So I think we totally agree. We've been trying at efforts like that, and hopefully we'll convince NIA that they should fund us to do it.
Thank you.
I guess a comment from one of the co-chairs of the cognitive work group of the CTF that have been working on this for a couple of years. So for the UDS-4, we tried to basically change as little as possible. It's very close to the cognitive battery of UDS-3. Probably the future of cognitive assessment is what was shown in some of those earlier slides with advanced digital techniques and all the great technology that's not quite ready for prime time, but getting closer and closer every day. So we tried to be very conservative. I think it's important to consider the distinction between harmonization efforts, which are happening anyway, Julie. They're happening from the Phenotype Harmonization Consortium that's organizing all the data that can be then linked up with the genomic data. So that's happening anyway. But prospectively, it's the issue about whether we want to aggregate, like the earlier NACC scan initiative that had a different name, but that pulled in MRIs, but they weren't all the same TE and TR and slice thickness and all those kinds of things. They were something we could look at. It was certainly much better than not having any imaging data, but it wasn't standardized, which then happened in SCAN. The same thing can be said for the cognitive data. It's great to have any cognitive data. You can take different story recall or list learning tests and figure out a way to harmonize them with IRT or Z-scores or something or other. But it's not the same as having some core battery that everyone in every center gets that then lets you link and gives you a crosswalk and bridging and anchor items and so forth. So these were really tough decisions that a lot of us, I think, debated for a long time and came up with a compromise that we thought was a good strategy going forward. But eventually we're going to get to something much better, I think, and more advanced. Anyway, great. 2 bits from the cognitive committee.
Thanks, that's great. Thank you so much. We're going to have to break. I'm sorry that we ran over. There's ice cream, though, waiting for all of you out in the hallway. So at least there's that. We ran over, but there's ice cream, and there's still plenty of ice cream left, I am told. So please go ahead and take a break. Thank you all for your attention and for being here, and we look forward to working with you.